welcome everybody to Parapsychology Foundation presents the PF International Affiliates Conference, New Faces in Parapsychology. As you know, we started at noon with our opening session, and Ana Flores was in the last substantive session, and now we're going to have Csongor Matyi from Hungary, who will be talking about his research. Later on in the day, we'll have Gabriel Teixeira de Medeiros, who will be talking about his research. So we're at this point at an autoganzfeld study conducted in 2011 for a master's thesis. Now I would like to tell you a little bit about him, and he can certainly add to this and correct me if I've made assumptions from your LinkedIn profile. Csongor, I hope not. So Csongor Matyi received his MA from the University of Budapest, where he first studied law, and then after a year spent in the UK, switched to experimental and cognitive psychology. Taking part in the Paris Euro-PA Convention in 2007, he was introduced to the international community of researchers in parapsychology, currently combining a psychological practice, specializing in talented children, with lecturing on the history and methods of parapsychology at, no, I'm going to do this badly because I didn't ask you, at Eötvös Loránd University. Sorry. He is also an active researcher and counselor. So I'm going to move to his PowerPoint, and you can go ahead and open your microphone now so we can hear you. Csongor, you can turn on your...
Fine.
There you go. And
I'm here.
I'll get out of your way.
All right. Thank you very much, Nan, for this nice introduction. And let me just say hello and a very good afternoon for all of you guys attending this class. Let me start with saying that I'm really happy to be here. It's a great pleasure for me, and it's a great honor that I was invited. And I'm really excited, to tell you the truth, because yeah, because this is something new for me, and if everything is okay concerning my audio and video coming through, then maybe we can just start. So just give me, sound is perfect, okay? Then yeah, are we good to go? Good to go. Okay. So thanks for the introduction. Yeah, I'm a psychologist by training, and I specialized, and I did my MA thesis specializing in cognitive and experimental psychology. I've met my mentor and then Professor Zoltán Basi. Basi Zoltán is how we say it, his name. So his first name is Zoltán, and I will refer to him as Zoltán or Zoli by his nickname. Back in 2006, and when I attended his course on parapsychology, I was just fascinated by this field of study. And for me, I might say that it was like falling in love with this topic and with this field of research. And since then, I just got fascinated to these types of experiments and research. On the somewhat darker side of it, we all know the disadvantages of being a scientist in parapsychology, or at least here in Hungary, if I may say so. But I'm pretty much aware that the status of parapsychology as a science or as a scientific approach is somewhat controversial. So let me just give you a few information on the background of it and on this experiment. This presentation given by Ana Flores was just absolutely great and marvelous, and I feel a bit humbled by this, because my experiment and my research was not the same level of professionalism as was presented by Ana. by her research. The main reason for this is because my research is somewhere between a student project and properly done, research done in the field. The reason for this is because it was indeed a student project, me being a MA student. But I was so fascinated by this telepathy thing and the Ganzfeld paradigm that I decided to make a research and conduct a research and run an experiment with autoganzfeld regarding the question of the possible telepathical communication of emotions. And that was my research done for my MA thesis, basically. So there we go. The main question, as you can see here, which grabbed my fascination, is that I was aware, well, with the help of Zoli and with some research done into the literature of telepathy, I was aware that Anderton and all the former experimenters done these experiments with pictures, with pictorial stimuli, and I was fascinated with the question: how can the telepathical communication of emotions can be tested? Or is there a way that we can test if emotions can be transferred via telepathy instead of pictures, or what I will refer to as static pictures? And when I use the term static, I mean statical, pictures, like pictures. So, yeah. My point in doing so was that there is always a big difference between the lab experiments and the everyday experiences and the everyday phenomena which people experience in cases of genuine telepathical experiences. And when I give lectures on this topic, I always highlight that these can be viewed separately, because everyday experiences are largely valid in the sense that they are ecologically valid, and that no one could really cast any doubt on the person's experience of a telepathical experience. But on the other side, or on the other hand, these experiences cannot be tested always in a lab. When we move to the lab to run a proper experiment, which is replicable, we sometimes have to sacrifice something of that ecological validity. Is that term okay, or is this the term that we are using when we are trying to referring how authentic this experience is? Because that's in my understanding that's what we use, ecological validity, to mention that this is how it happens in real life. Now, what happens in the lab can sometimes differ from that, and I was fascinated that in many case reports or case studies, telepathy is strongly connected to emotions, or into situations where basic emotions are involved. Just to give a few examples, or just to remind you, like in crisis situations or life-threatening situations, there are a huge number of case studies where people report such experiences when their life was in danger, when there was an accident involved. So it seemed to me that it would be a bit more valid in ecological validity terms if we could involve the role of emotions somehow into testing telepathical communication. So that was the basic idea why I've started to move on this path. Now, I was aware that there were a number of autoganzfeld studies done in Hungary by Zoli, my professor, and by another experimenter who can be viewed as a hobby researcher who does experiments of this kind as a hobby. All in all, there are 3 people, including Zoli and this gentleman called Thomas, and me in Hungary who ever done parapsychological experiments, to my knowledge, or that I'm aware of. So this other gentleman did a large number of autoganzfeld telepathy studies in the classical paradigm using pictorial stimuli, that is pictures, and I was largely building on his experiences and his protocols, as well as using his lab here in Budapest when I did my research for MA thesis. So that's all for the background. Now, when I've made this PowerPoint presentation, I kept it in mind that it might go to folks out there or here in this class who are not very familiar with the original paradigm. So for those who are already familiar with the classical paradigm created by Charles Arnoton and colleagues, then please excuse me for being boring, but let's just run through quickly through the features of the original paradigm. So in the Ganzfeld protocol, which was developed for testing telepathy since 1947 or so, the key aspect is that it involves 2 persons, a sender, or one who we dub the sender, and the receiver. Now the sender in the original paradigm tries to communicate features or information about a picture to the receiver by looking at a picture, by staring at a picture for the whole length or the whole duration of the trial. The target picture is usually randomly chosen from a set of 4. And the set of 4 is also randomly picked from a larger pool. Now, originally it was picked by using random number tables, and in the upgraded version of this protocol, in the autoganzfeld, it's all done by computers and all presented by computers. Now, the Ganzfeld term refers to a specific state of mind, to a specific mental state, which can be evoked when the sender is put into a situation in which he or she spends some time, usually 15 to 20 minutes, in a sensorially or sensorically, sorry for my bad English on this part, sensorial partially deprivated state, which is called the Ganzfeld. And after spending some time when the major sensory channels are given stimuli, but not patterned stimuli, that means the auditory channel is given stimuli which is called white noise, and the visual channel is given normally a homogeneous red light. That's what you can see on this picture, and this is basically the core situation of being in a Ganzfeld state. This is supposed to result in a heightened sensitivity towards detecting inward signals, towards detecting very weak signals which we associate with psi-mediated telepathy. And after some time spent this way, in this situation, the receiver can express his or her impressions verbally and in drawing once the trial has started, and sometimes with the help of an experimenter who's also there but who's also blind to the identity of the target. So that's the classical paradigm. Now, the statistical evaluation, the statistical testing of the results goes like this. The receiver, after the trial, matches his or her impressions against all 4 possible pictures that were in the original set and creates a ranked order of the 4 pictures. Now, a hit is recorded when the actual target is ranked as number 1 in the receiver's order of pictures. The null hypothesis is somewhat that goes like this. If no telepathy is involved, then it is pure chance that can contribute to hits. That is, with 1 out of 4, the chance hit ratio would be 0.25. Whereas the psi hypothesis says that if there is telepathy, we should find significantly higher hit ratios than that of the mean chance expectation. Now, according to literature, which reports multiple studies done with the same protocol, the averaged hit ratio is somewhere about 0.34, according to this reference I'm using, Dean Radin's marvelous Birth to Conscious Universe, and others as well. So this is how the original paradigm goes. And my method was the following. Let me just give you an overview of what I was trying to achieve. We did an overall 80 trials with participants recruited in absolutely informal channels. That is, I basically invited my friends and some students and some interested individuals from my circles, from my social circles, and there was no extra reward offered for participating in the experiment, except for that they can be a part of a very exciting experiment. And I decided to create 2 conditions in the experiment in order to contrast, or try to contrast, the different conditions and the possibly different results emerging from those 2 conditions. Condition A used the classic stimuli, which I call static pictures, which were depicting places of interest. And there were 40 trials using this type of stimuli. On the other hand, there was the huge question of how can I evoke emotions in the senders in order to be able to test whether the telepathic communication of emotions can be tested or can be grabbed somehow. So the question was, the main goal was to evoke emotions in the sender in the first place, and then to see if that can be communicated telepathically to the receiver in some way. Now, there is a great literature of how, in psychology, especially in, cognitive or affective psychology, how we can do that. but I've reached back to a somewhat easy and a well-known and well-documented method to do that. And there is a way of using pictures, emotion-evoking pictures, to reach that goal. And there is a international database which is called IAPS, International Affective Picture System, which contains a lot of pictures depicting various situations, animals, places, children, babies, snakes, whatever, you name that, in order to evoke emotions. Now, what types of emotions are we talking about? We are talking about a classification which classifies emotions into 4 categories. The 4 categories being emotions connected to the, let us say, basic emotion type of happiness, sadness, fear, or arousedness or high arousal or arousing pictures. The theory behind this classification goes like this. We can find a 2-factorial model using 2 factors which describe these basic emotions alongside these 2 factors. One being the balance, whether the emotion is positive or negative, and the other factor is being arousal, whether the emotion is associated with low arousal or high arousal. And this way, these 4 types of basic emotions can be viewed as happiness being an absolutely positive but a low arousal type of emotion, whereas sadness can be viewed as a negative emotion also with low arousal. Now, fearful pictures or fearful stimuli can be viewed as those with negative balance and which come with a high arousal, and exciting pictures or those situations which excite people, like skydiving or parachute jumping or gliding, or erotic stimuli, that is sexual stimuli, those can be viewed as those with positive balance and high arousal. Is it clear so far, or am I clear? just a quick feedback. Yes, okay, thank you very much. So, for this second condition, the dynamic stimuli, I used these emotion-evoking pics from the IAPS database, and I tinkered a little bit with these pictures, which mean I used some video editing software, and I've attached some matching emotion-evoking music as a musical background or background music, and I also did some camera movement, some panning and zooming on these pictures. I also had an idea of using videos, short video clips or movie clips, but at the end I've decided not to use movie clips because I've already learned from studying the literature that can contribute to a lot of information which then cannot be perhaps communicated in the same way, because a lot of, just think about a 2-minute long movie clip of, say, Trafalgar Square, London. a 2-minute time lapse or whatever. There is a lot of information and movement and things and shapes and people and happening and objects in this 2-minute long pool of information, and I feared that can be just too much. But in order to make it a bit more engaging than looking at a picture or staring at a picture for 5 minutes, that was the reason I decided on using some camera movements, focusing on some parts of the picture, then moving to another part of the picture with panning and zooming in, zooming out, which is also in line with some instructions we usually use while the trial is on, saying to receivers to let go of the first impressions, try to imagine a white blanket and try to give free room and free space and the blank sheet for new impressions to come in. So that was it basically. Those were the two types of stimuli I used in these two conditions. There was also a slight modification because white noise was replaced by a 15-minute long binaural beeping. What does that mean? It means that we put headphones on both the sender and the receiver, and we put them into a simultaneous binaural stimulating session for 15 minutes that went like beep 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 beep, and then it slowed down somewhat, like in terms of frequency, not in pitch, but in frequency, like beep 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 beep, and then after the end of the 15-minute session, it went back to a somewhat more frequent beeping to signal them that the session will end soon. So that was a 15-minute binaural beeping instead of white noise. Why did we do that? We did that because there were an assumption that this type of binaural beeping with the stereo headphones on, going out simultaneously for both people, may end in a somewhat synchronizing their minds or synchronizing their, states of mind in some way. This was clearly an unscientific assumption, but we just found it fancy to give it a try. So that was it, and otherwise the classic autoganzfeld protocol was followed. All the pictures and all these dynamic stimuli were presented on a computer screen. They were randomized by a computer random number generator, and so on and so forth. Now, every session contained 2 trials, and the roles of the senders and the receivers were drawn, or sometimes it was pre-discussed before the session. So we did one session that included 2 trials with the same roles of being the sender and the receiver for both conditions, both the static and the dynamic. And the next session, which happened usually a week after the first session or a few days after the first session, the second session, we reversed the roles and did 2 more trials, one in both conditions. Is it clear? Can we move on? Right, I hope so. There are no screaming in the chat box, so I hope we can move on. So the measured variables were, of course, the number of hits in each condition, and we also decided to measure some other psychological variables. Again, based on the literature review, I was trying to get some clarification in my research whether there is, whether I can replicate any effect regarding the sheep-goat effect to start first. And basically, I was just curious if there is anything to do, or if I can replicate the sheep-goat effect, meaning that those people who are more skeptical towards psi phenomena do worse in psi testing than those with an open mindset and who are open-minded to these paranormal or parapsychological things. Now, the measurement tool with which we've classified participants into two groups of that was an own questionnaire. It wasn't my own, it was Zoli's own, Zoltán's own, who created this questionnaire, but it was just a secondary, it was, this whole hypothesis was a secondary hypothesis to look if there were any differences in the hits of people with different mindsets. The level of stress when in the experiment was also measured, and we used the standard questionnaire, the state trait anxiety inventory for that, to assess how stressed our participants were, how anxious they were, or whether they were calmed and relaxed, and or they were just too anxious to be part of such an experiment. The third variable, psychological variable, I was trying to assess was the level of intimacy between the participants. It was basically a one item with 4 values, and I've grouped my participants who came to the lab without knowing each other, so there were no acquaintance between them, or there were some participants who were just casual friends. There were some who were close friends, knowing each other for many years, and there were participants who were either in an intimate relationship, couples, boyfriends, girlfriends, or relatives. I had one pair of participants who were a mother and a daughter, and things like that. And also, the last set of variables which I was trying to assess was the emotional state before and after the trial. Now, when I speak about the emotional state, I'm referring to these two basic factors of being in a positive or rather in a negative mood, and I was also asking them to rate their level of arousal on a 5-point Likert scale, depicting whether they are calm and there was no arousal or low arousal, or whether they were excited or that they were in a high arousal mood before and after the trial. You will understand why it became interesting at the end of this presentation. So, here are the two contrasting conditions and some samples of the stimuli. The statical stimuli, or which I call the classical stimuli, were pictures of places which are somewhat geometrically engaging, like the Great Pyramids of Giza. And now I will ask for Nan's help to be able to show you what I've created, as a dynamic stimuli. This, I hope you can see it and hear it. Here you can see a picture of a donkey cart, a poor donkey lifted to the air, which is, I believe it's very funny. Its cart is overloaded, and there was some fancy, funny music attached to it, the background music. let me grab a few feedback from the viewers or the attenders if they can listen and so that everyone is on the same page. So this was a video. Well, it's not a video, but I will refer to it as a video for the sake of saving some time. So it was a dynamic stimuli, a picture with background music, with some pan and zooming, and sometimes it was going back, and then it came back. Yeah. This was supposedly a stimulus to evoke a light and happy mood and good feelings and funny feelings. So yeah, so it was something to evoke happiness on the sender's part. Yeah, well, I think it's just okay. Let's move to the next one, shall we? And that was oh, I'm sorry, I've switched the window where I could show you the other one with the cemetery one, which were supposed to. Yeah, thank you for the help, and thank you for your great technical support here. There are the links. Okay. Right. So yeah, basically these were the which I call or dubbed this dynamic stimuli, pictures with some background music. This cemetery one is pretty depressing, so let's move on quickly because it will make me sad. But I think there were also ones for evoking sadness, and there were also pictures which were believed to create high arousal, ecstatic feelings, and exciting pictures. There were exciting pictures in terms of sexual content, both for male and female participants, and also some gender neutral like skydiving or parachute jumping and things like that. So yeah, basically these were the stimuli used in these two conditions, and in this way I could use all the former experiences done with pictures in other studies and add a new layer to the experience while during the trial trying to create an atmosphere, trying to create a mood or a feeling in the sender so that he or she can transfer that mood or emotion to the receiver. And I was hoping that the receivers could pick up on those emotions or on those hints of what mood or what emotional state their sender was in. Now let's move to the hypothesis. Obviously, we expected to have significantly higher hit rates than mean check expectation in both conditions. I also hypothesized that we may have more hits with dynamic stimuli than with ordinary pictures, because that was the whole point. That was my whole point, that I've believed that can be the emotional states or information about a sender's emotional state can be ecologically valid, and that might create more hits using this stimuli than just classic or static pictures. And of course, as secondary set of hypotheses, I also hypothesized that participants who are open-minded will perform better than those who are skeptical towards science phenomena, and B, participants who know each other well will outperform those who don't know one another so much, and also C, the participants who are more relaxed will outperform those who are somewhat stressed. So these were my hypotheses, and let's move on to the results, because I'm using up my time pretty quickly. So the results. The first chart here shows the numbers of the ranking order, and what you can see is that with static stimuli, 2 hits were recorded instead of the mean chance expectation, which is 10. That means with static stimuli, my participants could identify the target only 2 times. So they've ranked the actual target picture in their own ranking 2 times, and 15 and 16 times, 15 times as a second, 16 times as a third, and 7 times as a fourth one. With dynamic stimuli, oh, bad spelling on my part here. With dynamic stimuli, 8 hits were recorded instead of 10, which is the mean chance expectation. So I was pretty disappointed, because this was absolutely not what I was expected, and I was pretty depressed and sad that I couldn't get results which would support my hypothesis. Although the difference between the 2 conditions turned out to be significant, it seemed as if something went wrong, or just maybe if there were no telepathy involved or included at all. So those were my results regarding the number of hits my participants could record in either conditions. As for the secondary hypotheses, actually no really good data or results emerged, because I couldn't identify any significant difference between the performance of groups of people with high versus low anxiety. There were no significant difference between those who were in close versus casual relationship, or between groups of people who were skeptics versus open-minded. So there were no difference at all in their results, in their performance, which didn't make me happier, if you can get that. Which was a little bit brighter, or on the brighter side, which made me a bit happy, is that dynamic stimuli really caused a change of mood and arousal in senders, which means that these emotion-evoking dynamic stimuli seem to work. How do I know this? I know this because we've assessed the mood and arousal both in the senders and participants before and after the trial, which means in a part of the senders it was pretty clear that they entered the trial in some emotional state, and after watching these dynamic stimuli, they changed their mood according to the stimuli. They've reported themselves to be a bit sadder, or a bit happier, or a bit more excited, or a bit more feared or fearful after watching these stimuli. Now, what was interesting and an unexpected finding was that there was a change in the receiver's emotional state, who were absolutely blind to the nature of the target, which was shown to their senders, to their sender pairs or participants. And this change in the receiver's emotional state seemed to be a function of the type of the stimuli the senders received. Let me explain. There was a change of the level of arousal in the receiver's side, or in the receiver, was, well, talking about one receiver who was obviously blind to what type of emotion-evoking stimuli the sender received. And although there was no change in the sad or happy condition, there was a significant change in the other two, with the other two types of emotion-evoking stimuli. There was an increase of arousal with fear-evoking stimuli presented to the sender, and this created a change of arousal in the receiver, although they were blind. And there was also, here it is, and there was also a decrease of arousal in the receiver's mood when their sender were shown sexually arousing stimuli. Now, how on earth that can happen, I still don't know. But it was unexpected, and it was something really strange. Also, there was a change in the receiver's mood after the trial, but only with one condition and with one special type of emotion-evoking stimuli, and that was the fearful condition. What does it mean? It means that there was no significant change of mood of receivers except when fear-evoking stimuli was presented to senders. Because when a fearful snake or a shark or whatever you may find in the IAPS database and matched with some fearful background music, when this type of stimuli was were shown to the sender, the receiver's mood fell after the trial. That's what they reported before finding out what the real target was shown to the sender. So these ratings, these self-assessment ratings, were all done while still blind to the nature of the target their senders were in or were receiving. So a quick discussion of the results on the psi hypothesis. It was clearly shown that in my research we were unable to demonstrate the psi effect because there were no higher hit rates obtained, higher than MCE hit rates were obtained in either of the conditions. What was interesting is that with classic stimuli, that is with pictures, we obtained only 2 hits, whereas the mean chance expectation would be 10. So that might be an indicator of some psi missing effect. but and it may be so, but it would have been illegitimate to conclude that, because I was not testing for sinusing, and so we didn't move further on that path. Is it possible that there was a differential effect, which was first described by Rayo some 40 years ago? Maybe, because we know that when you contrast two things, two conditions, when testing for psi, the nature of psi likes to create huge differences in one condition versus the other. Maybe, I don't know. Still an open question. Another comment on the bad or very low hit rates can be that could it be that the anxiety of the experimenter, that is myself, had a detrimental experimenter effect? Again, I may say it might have been the case, or might have been the point, because it really, I mean, my results really seemed as if something pushed down the number of hits in both conditions in comparison to what I was expected, because I was expected, you know, a slightly above mean chance expectation in the classic, and a really high deviation from MCE in the dynamic stimulus. That was my original expectation. Now the whole thing seemed like as if these hits, these numbers of hits were pushed down by some unknown force, and maybe that was my anxiety or a bad experimenter effect. I don't know. Open to discussion. That's just speculating, basically. But it can be viable, because I can testify how anxious I was during my whole experiments, doing a parapsychological MA thesis for the first time in the history of Hungarian psychological education and training. So, you know, and it was, everything was at stake, and okay. I can safely say that my psychological variables were very far from being optimum or optimal. Now, a quick discussion of the non-expected findings would be that actually there was a significant change in the emotional state, which resulted, so the one comment on why there were significant change in emotional state can be that maybe it resulted from running multiple analysis of variances. So maybe there was some inflation of the alpha-type error included. That is a valid assumption. Maybe that created the change in the emotional state results. Or there was some specific response to the videos on the receiver side, who were, although blind to the nature of the target their senders received, responded somewhat specifically. I don't know why. Or, as a third comment, maybe, just maybe, there is or there was an unknown connection between the arousal changes in the receivers and the senders. I think, and I concluded, that this last option could be further explored. Welcome to the Ganzfeld research. That's what Nan commented. Yeah, well, yeah, this happens sometimes. So I think that would be an interesting thing to explore further. Also, to this last comment, actually, non-local correlations between physiological variables were found elsewhere in the literature. I'm referring to Mario Skipenitz's 2007 research. So it's not new that there are non-local correlations between physiological variables between the sender and the receiver. I found something similar or somewhat similar results. Also, I found that in my research, the sexual and the fearful stimuli evoked somewhat different responses. There were no fancy thing for happiness and sadness evoking stimuli, but it was not the case for sexual and fearful stimuli, as if they were somewhat exceptional stimuli for the organism. And this is again not new. This is in line, actually, with the results of classic presentiment experiments of Reddin and Bierman, just to mention the classical research. So, can it suggest the existence of a non-verbal, maybe primitive communicational channel between organisms? Who knows? I would say that further experiments would be needed to clarify that. So, actually, that's it. Thank you for your kind attention. That was my research. I know it's not on the same level as a doctoral thesis or anything like that, but it was pretty much my biggest effort done for an MA thesis, and so that's it. Thank you again for your kind attention and for this opportunity to be here and present my findings. It was 6 years ago. That's a long time. I didn't have the opportunity to keep on with my work since then, but now with a change of winds, I'm trying to refresh that research project, and now I have the opportunity to work at the university. And I have available students who I might invite to some research projects, maybe a continuation of this autoganzfeld, maybe some pre-sentiment projects. I'm very passionate about these type of research, and I will refresh this whole parapsychological research here in Hungary. At least that's what I hope. So, thank you very much. I will give back the floor to Nancy.
Don't go away. Thank you very much for your talk. It's very, very good. And I wouldn't be so depressed about the study. Everybody's got to start somewhere, and you have some very interesting results there. I mean, I wanted to go back to this slide. And I thought this was really kind of fascinating how high the number of second-class hits were. I mean, unfortunately, you also had some high third-class hits.
Yep.
But I know that in the old days, in the 80s, when Chuck Arlington was first starting, they were very interested in what they called, and I've forgotten how they put it, but it was only looking at. It was a 2x2 rather than four of data to put into the statistical analyses, and they would just look at either a 1 or a 2 as one group and a 3 or a 4 as another group, and then use that as the basis of the analysis. That's thing I'm looking at. You have, how many subjects did you have here?
As for the subjects, I had 40, and since they, 40. Yeah.
Okay, and they all did more than one trial?
Yes, because every subject was in one session. They were in one session a sender, and in another session they were receivers. So I could contribute 2 trials for all the 40 participants. That's how I came up with 80 trials.
Right. Because another issue would be power as well, and that's really hard to do when you're starting out or you're working on a semester by semester kind of a basis. It's something that you see often in the various universities, that the faculty and the students have 4 months to complete a study, and to get to 120 subjects or 120 sessions can often be difficult.
Yes, right.
And the notion of having more power when we already know from the beginning that the signal is very weak no matter what we do. Binary hit, that's what I was looking for. I'm getting old. Thank you, Brian. Chuck used to do binary hit analysis. But power and then perhaps another way of looking at the analysis is interesting. The other thing I thought was really interesting was that if a little bit of the emotion was leaking through, essentially, on a regular basis from sender to receiver, that, as you were saying, has kind of the feel of a presentiment kind of effect. That the emotion was, but it was not coming up out of the unconscious to turn into an identifiable something that could be used to make the judging at the end. So I'm assuming this was all subject judging, that everybody picked their targets at the end?
Yes, it was subject judging, yes. And also,
we found...
And also, after judging, and once the original targets were revealed to the receivers, there were some really great ahas, and well, yeah, that's how and that's why I seen those, patterns during my trial. So at this point, it is really difficult to say whether, we cannot exclude the effect of precognition or presentiment, because there was such a great moment of joy or moment of despair or moment of disappointment when the cat were out of the box and the participants were shown, well, this was the original target, so yeah, that was a nice hit, or there wasn't any hit. So it might have influenced somehow back in time, I don't know, it's just speculating. But again, this was my first job done, first research done, so I was really a newbie and a newcomer to this field, but I liked it so much. My participants liked it so much. We were all involved emotionally, so God knows what emotional influences interacted with each other on that.
Exactly.
Right.
Did you? And then when you're as an experimenter, when you're involved on the day-to-day basis, and you're kind of, even if you're not formally toting up, okay, I've got this many hits and this many things to go, which you really shouldn't be doing, you still have an impression about how things are going. And as an experimenter or experimental team, it affects your way of looking at it. There's an old piece of lab from folks my age when we were all young, that one team actually was terribly tempted to change their hypotheses halfway through, because it really looked like it was going to end up being sign missing. And you just wanted to say, you got to go out and have a beer, calm down. It's going to be okay kind of thing, because you want to that emotional welcoming thing in the laboratory. But it's really difficult because you've got an experimental team or human beings with emotions, and you've got...
Sure.
Exactly. Very complicated. So Doug is asking, if I missed this, but for each set of 4 items, images or videos, were the items chosen randomly, or was an attempt made to choose items with content as different from one another as possible? So how did you pick the judging set?
You mean the set of 4? Set of, the items in the set of 4 were chosen with an attempt to make them as different from each other as possible. But when the actual trial was started, the actual target out of the 4 was obviously chosen randomly. But when creating the sets, I tried to keep it in mind to make them as different as possible. Now, it wasn't difficult when it came to the dynamic stimuli, because there were one out of each basic emotion. So in a set of 4, there were a happy and a sad and a fearful and so on. Between sets, there were no attempts made to make them different. But within the sets, even if it was the dynamic, it was easier to maintain that difference. With the classic stimuli, it was just chosen pictures from the IAPS database. Did I make it clearer or muddier? Doug?
Yeah, no, that made it much clearer. That's good. And I think most experimenters don't look at the within sets. so much. They don't think about the pool composition, but rather just the judging set composition. And then, but then you have people like Russell Targ who used to say back in the day, but you're showing them all 4 targets, so if there is precognition involved, they've got 4 sets of imagery that's getting involved in the telepathy moment or the ESP moment that happens as a receiver. So it's just very complicated. Brian is saying, I wonder also if minor changes to the methodology, like using the beeping instead of white noise, could have affected the results. This is based on the 2001 Bem et al. Meta-analysis, which found Ganzfeld studies which deviated from the standard methodology for process-oriented reasons were not quite as successful as compared to straight replication.
Right, that's a good point, Brian, and I agree with that, except for the fact that when I did this research, unfortunately, I was not aware of this connection between deviation from the classical Ganzfeld. So I had high hopes. I had great desires to show that the emotions can work better, and that with my modifications, and white noise is not that good. Let's use something different which can work better. I hope that it might work just as well. Turned out that it didn't. And maybe that's the case. Maybe I shouldn't have deviated from the classical paradigm that much. Who knows?
Well, the reality is what you've done here is a very well constructed experiment, and that, excuse me, and that you had more that you were ambitious about your hypothesizing is not a bad thing. It's a great place to start, and I think you've got a good foundation to go forward on as well. So I find the whole thing very exciting. Michael is saying, in the interest of keeping file drawers to a minimum in future meta-analysis, is this experimental report part of the official record? And also, does the group that you're part of in Hungary, do you have a website?
Oh, thank you, Michael, for this question. Unfortunately, I have disappointing answers. These results were not reported in an official paper, since it was as I said, basically a student project. It was part of my thesis. It was reported as my thesis, and these results and this paper can be found in the drawers of the Hungarian University and the Faculty of Psychology, but it wasn't published in any kind of journal. So yes, it still stays in a drawer, but nobody knows about that. Am I part of a group? No, because there is no such group here in Hungary. There are 3 people, Zoltán, our friend Tamás, and myself, who are doing this. No institution, no state support, no private sector support. It's just, passion, and passionate researchers trying to come up with results.
Well, I think that's wonderful, and you're not alone in that either. There's a lot of people around the world who have a big passion for the field and do research where and when they can. And you're also in semi-good company in terms of being in the file drawer, because, as I hear from my husband on a semi-regular basis, my first Ganzfeld study that we did at the Rhine Research Center, actually back in the 1980s, it never was published independently, and you could only find out about it through a line in a later Ganzfeld study that was done by Richard Broughton.
Well,
after I
listen, I'm more than happy to share these results with all of the community or with all the members, because it's out there. Use it, include it in further meta analyses. I'm happy to do that. I may even write a short, somewhat of an abstract in English about that. Just to make it public, so that I did this and it didn't turn out, so that it can be of good use for further researchers or experimenters.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I don't know what my husband is typing. I'm worried that he's going to tell me I should do the same, but it gets reported elsewhere. So I would like to say that this is a very good study. Now, I know you were saying that now that you have a group of students, you're thinking about doing research with your students. What kind of research would you like to be doing?
Well, there are many options. First, since Daryl J. Bam's pre-sentiment and precognition paper got the fascination of my students, I thought that it might be a good idea to do some kind of replication of his time-reversed classical psychological experiments. That might be a good choice. I was also thinking about following another path, which is Sheldrake's path, Rupert Sheldrake's I'm talking about, and his or his team's email telepathy experiments and the SMS text message telepathy experiments, because because they are so easy to administer, and then with these technical settings which we have nowadays, I think that would be pretty easy in terms of applying and implementing all the experiment, and that might be fun for my students as well. So right now I'm a bit inclined towards doing the replication of Sheldrake's email telepathy, or Bam's replication, basically. Mm-hmm. And I didn't let go of my fixation of emotions. So I still believe that emotions might have some role in one way or another. I'm still thinking about how I might involve that factor in either of these classic experiments or paradigms. Those are the future projects. I haven't decided on them yet.
That sounds great, and I think you're right to keep a handle on that aspect of emotion. I think that's very important, and a lot of people are still talking about it. And certainly, if you see the spontaneous case record, there's an awful lot of emotion in the experiences that people have spontaneously. So Carlos was saying one way to make it public is to write a short note or short research note for the Journal of the Society for Psychical Research, and they do publish those. That makes gives the public public recognition of the work that you did do, and it keeps it out there for people who are going to come along and do another meta-analysis or check out the first one, because meta-analytical procedures too have quite a bit of subjectivity in it, and sometimes it's just how far afield they go to find who's in the file drawer and who isn't, and where work was done and so on.
I will. I actually did something very similar 4 years ago. 4 years ago, there was a website up and going, which is not anymore right now, but there was the website called The World of Parapsychology, the WOP, W-O-P, right? You remember that?
Yeah.
And it was maintained by some French guy, maybe.
Yeah, Renaud and Nikos Komartzis from
Yes, I've met Renaud in that convention back in Paris, and I knew him, and that's where I've published these results in the form of just a very short abstract. And but since the website was taken down, these results are not visible. I believe so. So. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas the SPR that was a financial decision that they couldn't avoid. But the Society for Psychical Research is now, and it's 100 and I don't know. their 100th anniversary was 1982. So they're doing fine, and the journal is still out there. So that's a good place to think about. Any more questions, folks? Well, I have to say that I think both Carlos and I are agreed that this was a very, very good look through your research. It was well presented and well designed, and
thank you.
everybody that gets involved in experimental research has to keep at it, essentially, because the best ideas that you have sometimes take a while to come to fruition because of methodological details or the participant pool, the number of people you can test, and so on. So I think this is really wonderful. I'm really glad that you agreed to be part of the New Faces Conference today.
I'm very happy that you invited me, and I really appreciate your help with the technicals and all the background. So I much appreciate your work here, and thanks for inviting me. Guys, thanks for watching, and thanks for listening, and thanks for all the support coming in the chat box. Thank you so much, guys. Cheers.
Yeah,
I will not give up.
Exactly. Well, I hope we will see you in more online events for the foundation and elsewhere. And thank you, everybody. And we'll see you at 5 p.m. in about a half an hour.
Hi there, I'm Lisette Coley. I'm president of Parapsychology Foundation, so welcome to our YouTube channel. We have lots to look at, so please check out our videos. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.